visible to Facebook. So if that is not your interest, I suggest you enjoy this with the video off. Also, because we are not in webinar Zoom, participating video off might make it easier for you to tell sort of who our panelists are for the day. We appreciate it. I want to give it a few more minutes for people to make their way in here, and then we'll get started. Also, thank you to those of you who submitted questions in advance. If you have questions that come up as we go, you can pop those into the chat and Carrie will get them over to me and we'll do our best to make time for them. But we did have a lot of great questions get submitted already. So we will do what we can to answer anything and everything about theater sound design. This is the most sound designer thing ever, just waiting in silence in anticipation.
We forgot to put pre-show music in.
We did forget to put pre-show music. I'll take a note. All right, I was just gonna say, I think I'll wait until we see Jess again, and then we will get started because we got Jess, we got Jess's cat, we got everyone. So
and my cat is now trying to drink my water out of my glass. Stop.
Hydrate or dihydrate.
This is going to happen for the whole thing. He's gonna climb up onto my desk, and he's gonna come right back up. Stay there. Just stay there.
Awesome.
Yep. Okay. Yep. Here we are. Hi.
All right. So welcome everyone. For those of you who are just coming in, this is Ask the Experts, Theater Sound Design. My name is Becca. I am a New York City-based theatrical sound mixer, and our 4 panelists today are just like my absolute heroes, and I would like to work for every single one of them. Like I said, my name's Becca. I use she, her pronouns. I know that we are gathering in the virtual space, but I want to acknowledge that I am moderating this on the ancestral lands of the Wappinger, Pagusset, and Quinnipiac tribes, known today as New Haven, Connecticut on maps. If you cannot see me, I'm going to give a brief image description of myself. I am a white woman with light brown hair. I'm wearing headphones and a Batman shirt. Behind me there are some plants and a bookshelf and a poster from my most recent show, Rock of Ages. If any of my introduction practices are new to you or you want to learn more about them, I'm going to put some links about them in the chat. And without further ado, I'm going to spotlight our panel so you can see them. We have Tony Award-winning sound designer Jess Paz. We have Tony-nominated sound designer Cricket Myers. We have up-and-coming New York City sound designer Twee McCallum and amazing West Coast sound designer Elisabeth Weidner. Welcome all. With that, I'm going to ask the first question of you all, and then we'll get to the participant questions. My question for each of you in turn is, when did you first learn what sound design was, and when did you decide you wanted to do it as a career? And Cricket, you can go first.
Okay, my story's not like most people, I admit. I started in theater in college and thought I wanted to be a stage manager, got out into the real world, went, I don't want to do this. And actually, I thought, well, maybe I want to be a lighting designer because like I know how to hang lights. So I applied to grad school with no experience at all and met John Gottlieb at CalArts, and I had a long conversation with him. And at the end of the conversation, he looked at me and said, "You're a sound designer and you just don't know it yet." So that's how I got into sound, admittedly. So he accepted me into color arts, and I spent the summer interning at a very nice theater that the sound guy there taught me everything he knew. So I walked into grad school knowing something, and then kind of went from there. But John recognized that I experienced the world in an aural way, not a visual way. So I think like a designer, but I don't think visually. And that's something that he recognized in me that I had not recognized. So.
Awesome. I also studied stage management, and we had that in common.
Yeah.
How about you, Twee? When did you first learn what sound design was, and when did you decide you wanted to do it?
Yeah, I knew sound design existed when I was in undergrad at Howard. Although I didn't graduate, I failed all of my classes my last year and had to drop out. But they did like 2 productions every semester, and they did a musical my first semester there that I thought was beautiful. And at the time, I was the dresser. I was one of the dressers backstage. And during the show, just standing back there, listening to the music coming through the speakers and seeing someone all the way up in the booth mixing the show, I was like, oh my gosh, this is so beautiful. And I literally cried. All my shows make me cry. But at the time, Howard didn't have any sound professors. Unfortunately, they still don't. So when I was there, like I wasn't encouraged to do it, but I was forced to learn costumes and lighting and scenic, and I failed all of those classes. And I moved to New York immediately after I left school. And my first job in New York was this apprenticeship at a dance company. And they were the ones for the first time that taught me what a speaker is and how to stand on a ladder to hang a speaker and how to get QLab to go through those speakers and things like that. So it was really a like epiphany moment into failure, and then finally having the opportunity to be taught.
Awesome. Elisabeth?
My story is pretty unusual too. I went to school at Florida State University for music, specifically commercial music. I didn't study theater at all. And I was thinking at the time that my goal was to be a record producer, build a brick and mortar studio, and do that kind of thing. And then sort of halfway through my college career, people started being able to do that kind of a thing for themselves. And equipment and software got affordable. People, like the emergence of the home studio became a thing. And I was like, oh no one's going to pay me to do this thing everyone can do on their own now. And so when I graduated from college, I moved to California to basically be a rock star, I guess, was my goal. And I'm not a rock star, so that didn't happen. But
you're totally a rock star. You're totally a rock star.
But I did just respond to an ad to be a sound engineer, a resident sound engineer at a theater in San Diego. And I was like, oh, that's right. Actually, I do have a lot of theater background because my dad did theater a lot when I was growing up, and he has a few degrees in theater. And so I often did community theater with him. And so I was like, actually, I really love theater and I know how to be a sound engineer. So I took that job. And in that very first show that I was a part of, the artistic director said, also, you should sound design this show. And I was like, okay, great. I will do that. What does that mean? And so I sort of just started learning, via trial by fire. And that's how it went.
Love it. Jess?
Oh gosh. Oh, look, my cat actually unmuted my mic for me. Thank you. Okay. I didn't even realize that jobs like in theater were a thing, right? I was like that naive audience member who went to see musicals on Broadway when I was in high school and thought it was just magic, right? And then I had a friend who started performing in a community theater in the Rocky Horror Show, and I ran the fog machine at the end so that I could get in for free. And then they asked me to stage manage. So like the rest of you, I stage managed first. And then they there was just a show that sounded not good, and I loved the show so much. It was Bat Boy the musical, and I asked a friend of mine how to do a sound check, and he described it to me, and I went in the next day and I did the sound check, and we had a show without feedback for the first time. And then I decided that it would be best for me to mix the show too. So I started doing that. Then I started just freelancing at all the community theaters in Long Island. And I went up to my artistic director. We were about to do a production of Smokey Joe's Cafe. And I said, I really want to design this show. I think that you should give me the job. And if you're not happy after 2 days of tech, you can fire me. And he gave me the job, and he didn't fire me.
So you
The rest is
do it.
history.
Well, that's a great segue into talking a little bit about, since you've all talked your origin stories, let's continue talking about starting out in the industry. I'm gonna let Cricket take first stab at this one, but you can all jump in. Ken asks, what do you need to start working in theater sound?
I mean, I think I can go really broad with it and be like an eagerness to learn and enjoyment. I mean, you have to enjoy music, you have to enjoy sound, you have to enjoy theater. For me, it's about storytelling. So I think you have to be really interested in storytelling and character and how to convey ideas and emotion to an audience. I think those are the things that really excited me about sound and how I can use sound to tell a story. You can learn the technical stuff, you can learn the software, you can learn all of those things, but if you aren't passionate about telling stories and you aren't passionate about using music and sound to make that happen, the hours are killer and it's a lot of work. And I joke that like getting the next job is a full-time job on top of the full-time job of designing the show I'm designing. So like it's a lot of work. So if you're not excited about it, if you don't love it, it's a hard thing to do, but
you gotta be creative, you gotta have passion. You do not need school. You can go to school. You do not need a degree. You can get a degree. I'm not saying those things are bad things, but I appreciate that is not a prerequisite to getting into doing.
There's 1,000 ways to learn this. And a lot of the people I work with have no school training in this at all. They learned by doing it, by getting excited and showing up at the theater and saying, can I help? Can I volunteer? Can I stand next to you and watch you? And I say, yeah, sure. And that's
definitely. Anyone else care to weigh in?
I would say sheer determination. I mean, like Cricket said, the hours are long, the job is hard, the opportunities are a full-time job to come by, right? And you have to love it. And if you don't love it, you're not going to like the hours or the hard work, right? And for me, it was just a complete obsession. It was the first thing that I did that was so tedious, I could never possibly know everything about it, right? Which is why it's held my attention for 20 some odd years at this point. Prior to that, every other job I had held my attention for 6 months to a year, and I was ready to move on. And I was bored, right? So I think, yeah, obsession. I have nightmares. I have dreams about what I do because I'm like, wait a minute, did I put that cable in the thing? What about that speaker? Oh my God, where's I swear to God. I mean, it's sheer obsession for me.
Love it. This is a good segue since we also talked about, what you need to start. Elisabeth, you can weigh in first on this. Are theater internships worth it?
Well, this is a tricky time to ask a question about internships. First of all, an internship of any kind is only worth it if you're being paid well to be there. Down with the unpaid internships and down with the $50 a week internships. Having said all of that, and that is the soapbox that I permanently stand on, yeah, I think they're totally worth it. It's an opportunity to usually work alongside industry professionals without being held to the same expectation as those industry professionals. You can learn from them. You can know exactly what their process is, what made them so good, and still be, in a sort of learning and student type of capacity that everyone understands. Like, oh, it's okay, you're learning. But a lot of times too, in internships, in theater companies, regional theaters, a lot of regional theaters are connected to, other places. Where I was last in residency, I would always say we're the feeder school for Disneyland. And a lot of the interns that we would get, we would connect them with Disney, and then they would go work there, and that was, their dream come true. So if not for, working alongside, sort of kick-ass people and learning the trade in a really hands-on way, then for the networking that you get out of an internship, I think it's super worth it for sure.
Go for it, Jess.
I stand on the same soapbox as Elisabeth. Internships should be paid, but I will also just want to add that an internship is as worth it as you make it, right? I've had a number of interns, and the one who followed me around the theater asking me a billion questions while they were my intern and wanted to know why I was doing everything I was doing, and why are you changing that delay time, and have you thought about this thing, and why don't you use that technique, or why do you choose this? That person I now hire for work. And then there was an intern who showed up, didn't pay attention, didn't ask questions, was often late, and while they were there, spent all their time on their phone. That person I would never hire nor recommend for work. So it is what you make of it.
All right, that segues really well to our next question, which I'll let you expound on this a little more, Jess. Alex asks, what's the best way to get your foot in the door?
Oh gosh, I mean, everyone's story is different, right? Everyone's story of how they got into this work is different. And some people would say, go on tour, or some people would say, do all the jobs, or be an A2 or be an A1, send your resume to every designer you know. All of those are valid. I think get your foot in the door, take every job you can get, right? And for me, it was doing all the jobs, right? I hauled a 250-foot cable across a football field. I pushed boxes. I unloaded trucks. I was an A2. I was an A1. I was a stage manager. I was a designer. I did all of the jobs, and it only makes you better able to understand what the other positions do, right? And now as a designer, I can sort of go back on that knowledge, and I know what it is to mix a show. So I know what my A1 needs. I know what it is to be an A2 and the challenges that they face. So I know how to support my team better because I've done all the jobs. So all the things, email all the people, make all the phone calls, do all the jobs.
I always say, oh, go ahead.
There you go.
I was just going to say, I always say, if there's a designer that you really like their work and you're interested in working with them or whatever, shoot them an email and be like, can I buy you coffee and just pick your brain for an hour? I'll always meet with someone for an hour and chat. And if we get along and you're, like Jessica said, if you're excited and you ask questions and you're interested and you're engaged, then you're on my list to hire. That's
all right. Here's a sort of different one that I think rings interestingly in light of the pandemic. I'm going to let Tweet start because I know that you have an interesting answer to this. Have you branched out of theater sound? If so, what kind of sound work are you doing? And was it difficult to transition?
Yeah, I've been very fortunate that slightly before the pandemic happened, I started really wanting to transition out of theater because I felt I wasn't gonna get any jobs that I wanted in theater, which is now the complete opposite. But before the pandemic happened, I was interning at a Foley studio, and then the pandemic happened, and then every theater person knew what Foley was, which I thought was really cool. So now, because of the past year, the work I've done, I'm I still do a lot of television work and commercial work, which is cool. I've done a television show for Stars, a show for NBC. I'll be doing something for Marvel soon. So yes, but I feel like the caveat is it would have been very difficult for me to break into another field had the pandemic not happened. So I'm very grateful for that. And because theater went virtual over the past year, it made it easy for me to be prepared to do a bunch of Zoom theater and radio plays because I was already working in software like Pro Tools so much to edit a story for television, if that answers the question.
Totally. Anyone else want to weigh in on side hustles, pandemic or non-pandemic?
I have a pretty fun side hustle that I got started on like 5 years ago. And I live near a casino. And so there's shows there usually every Friday, sometimes Thursday, Friday, Saturday, like concerts that come through. And I just joined that crew, and it's the most fun thing because I'm not in charge there. I am not a designer there. I just haul cable and like listen to the guys who are on the show and, do what they tell me to do. But it's really awesome because, it's a different show every week. It's different gear all the time. I always stand in monitor world. And so I'm with all of these monitor mixers that come through and just seeing what everyone else's, trades and practices are. It's like a huge fact-finding, mission for me. And it helps me feel like I'm staying current and like knowing what other people are doing out there in the elsewheres of the country. And it's also just a lot of fun. It's really fun to, be a theater sound designer and, work really hard on that. And then on Fridays, just go like wear all my black clothes and like haul cable with the guys, It's just like another world, and it's almost like a release to me. Helps me sort of stay grounded and like remember that this is something that I really love, and it's really fun when, sort of the going gets tough.
That actually totally mirrors. I have also worked as crew at a local casino, and I agree that it was such a great opportunity to just get your hands on like really big gear, do really big ins and outs. It's also, at least in my area, was one of the best paying stagehand jobs you could get was working at Mohegan Sun.
It's the reason why I was able to leave my residency and become full freelance, because it's such a reliable source of income for me that I was able to like take this step that I've been really eyeing for a long time.
Awesome.
I definitely had a side hustle pre-COVID times where I'd mix a bunch of bands at music venues like Knitting Factory. And I had one or two bands that I was their front of house engineer. So I would sort of follow them all over the city and mix their gigs. And I will say, being able to make a band sound good with nothing but a bunch of SM57s is a skill every sound person should have. Like hands down, if you can make that sound good, you can make anything sound good. But if you can't make that sound good, then you have some work to do because you can absolutely make a band sound good with nothing but SM57s.
Totally. And the other thing that just reminded me too, Jess. So it goes the other way too, because I'm the only person in the sound department at that casino that is also a theater person. And so I bring another set of skills that they don't necessarily have. My favorite use of sort of being able to flex this skill was when we were doing the show, The Thunder from Down Under. Which is a male dance review show. I'll just say that. And they use QLab, but they didn't know like how to like patch it into our system, like a lot of their targets were off when they got to us, et cetera. And they were like, oh no, what do we do? And our house guys were like, we'll figure it out. And I was like, I've got this, step aside. and they were just like really happy that I was able to, sort of figure that out for them.
Nice. All right. This question I'm going to put specifically to Cricket and Elisabeth because you are both West Coast-based sound designers. Angela wants to know, the Center of Musical Theater is in New York, but I live in California. Can you give me any tips on starting a musical theater sound design career while living on the West Coast? Because you two are proof that it absolutely can be done.
I mean, Elisabeth, I like PCPA, I think is a great place to, you know more about it than I do, but
yeah, PCPA, Pacific Conservatory Theater is on the Central Coast where I live in Santa Maria. And that's what I was talking about before when I was like, we're a feeder school for Disneyland. Not just that, you know, a lot of my like former interns are still really successful. Like one is the staff sound engineer or lead sound engineer at for Yale. You know, just like a bunch of different really great jobs have sort of come across these interns that came out of there. But yeah, so as far as like starting on the early career path, if you're into an internship or some summer work, I think PCPA is a really great place to start. And also because they offer a lot of different experiences. So there's an outdoor theater that you work in. You could potentially work in a black box theater and then another indoor sort of stadium seating theater. So all in the same summer. So there's a lot of experience to be gained there. The tricky part about California is that it's so big. It's not the New York City, like tight knit little network. It's like, I mean, I even still kind of struggle because I'm far away, only 2 hours really from LA, but that's the center of, you know, theater here. So,
yeah, it's like, I think getting started in musical theater is the same way you get started in any area. It's like, reach out to the people who are doing it and say, I want to come assist you. I want to come sit next to you in a tech and learn, you know, whenever you're doing your next musical, let me know. And, you know, if you end up sitting next to me for a day or two of tech, and then maybe the next show you become the assistant or my associate, or if you're interested in mixing, like there are not enough engineers in California, in Los Angeles. Like I'm always looking for engineers. So, you know, there's a lot of opportunities, but I think it's reaching out to the people, it's making those connections, reaching out to the big houses that do the musicals, not just the Amundsen and the Pantages, because those are tours, but reach out to
Limited Playhouse.
Yeah, 5 Star up in Thousand Oaks, or Musical Theater West, which is just south of the city, you know, and saying, I want to learn, I want to, you know, come be on your crew, come meet your designers, come do that, you know, reach out to the houses, because they're always looking for people, especially as they're starting to reopen. So many people have scattered across the country that they're all looking to restaff. So.
Excellent. Jess, when should you consider joining the union?
When they make you. I mean, you should probably join sooner than that. But for me, it happened when I had to, because I think the rule at the time, I was about to do my first Broadway show as an associate, and I think I had to join. But I think the rule is actually that you can do up to 3 professional productions before they make you join. And I think I probably could have gotten away with it, but I wanted the benefits. So I decided to take the test, and it took me a very long time to pay back my aunt for my fees. But yeah.
Let me back up for those who don't know, who are listening along. Broadway sound designers are part of IATSE 829, United Scenic Artists, which is a local of the Stagehands Union that is specifically for designers. And most regional theaters also only hire union designers. Yeah, so, you know, once you get big, you will find you are probably looking to be in USA 829.
I think sooner rather than later, because of benefits, right? Pension and welfare, earning toward health insurance, et cetera, and so on. But go ahead, Cricket.
I always tell people when you're starting to work in the houses that would give you a union contract, if you were union, is when you should join the union. If you're working in the 99 seat houses, if you're working in the off Broadway where they're going to pay you $20 anyway, obviously there's no point in joining the union. They're never going to sign a union contract. They're never going to pay benefits. But as soon as you start working in the houses that would give you a contract if you were in it, then you should join, because you're going to get the money into your health insurance. You're going to get the money into your pension, which, when you're in your 20s, who cares about a pension? But now that I'm, coming into my midway through my 40s, you start caring that I have a pension, So, but for me, like I was in the same situation as Jess. I got a job where I had to be, because I was an associate in a house that it was required. And I admit the first year or two I was in, I don't know that I got much from the union, because I did that one job and then I didn't do anything else that was willing to sign a USA contract for a couple of years. But there are houses out there, I can speak to Los Angeles best because I know it. There are 99 seat houses that will happily give you a USA contract if you ask for it. They won't necessarily offer it if you aren't USA. But once you start working in those houses, join the union and get the benefits. You get a higher wage, you get the health insurance, you get the pension, and it's worth, then your dues pay off because you get the benefits. So. Speaking
Excellent.
as a board member of USA.
Excellent. This one's for anybody who wants to answer it. Alex asks, what was the biggest challenge you faced in starting your career?
That every man around me told me I didn't know what I was doing.
Yeah, for sure. I mean,
and some of them weren't even sound people. They were actors who told me that I didn't know what I was doing. I digress.
Yeah, that's definitely a big, it's hard to break out into something new, and like the imposter syndrome situation is already very difficult, and then to have the gender that like is currently running the industry sort of break you down during all of those other emotional like turmoil that's going on inside your head. It can be really difficult. I too found that to be a big problem when I was first starting out. I mean, it still happens now. I just guess that I care less about what other people are saying to me. As long as I know that I know what I'm doing, then that's all that matters to me.
And I'll elaborate a little bit, and because I was just being a little catty. But when I first started out, I didn't have the greatest grasp of the technical elements of how to do the job, but I knew how to make it sound good, right? And the thing that I was criticized for not knowing what to do was that I couldn't explain how I got the results I was getting. I didn't know how. I just moved the knobs and did the things until it sounded better. And it took me learning on the job what I was actually doing to get those results and why. But I think that, in hindsight, I still think that it was pretty crap to accuse me of not knowing what I was doing when the results I was getting were the results I should be getting. I just couldn't explain to you why. Right. And I would encourage anyone that is, I was learning. Anyone who's learning shouldn't be criticized in that way. It's not. They should be uplifted. They should be, pushed along. They should be steered toward resources that will help them. And that's what I do with people who are learning now because of my experiences.
I would say the hardest thing for me was kind of the financial aspect when I was brand new in the industry, because I didn't start as crew. I didn't start as I kind of jumped right into designing, and I assisted a couple of people, but for me it was that the small houses, that were willing to take a chance on me because they didn't have a lot of experience are also the houses that would pay me $200 a show. And to pay your rent on $200 a show, you got to do 4 to 6 shows in a month, which means you don't sleep and you're moving constantly and you're exhausted and you're not eating, and you're always worried about the next job, because again, when you're young in your career, they don't hire you 6 months out. They get into rehearsals and it's like, oh gee, I guess we should have a sound person, and and that's when you get the phone call. So you don't know what your next job is a month or 2 out. So how much money can I spend this month because I've got to pay my bills next month? That was kind of the hardest for me, and navigating what my time was worth. And it's like, versus the experience, because when you're early in your career, sure, the show's only paying me $200, but it's a show on my resume and it's a contact with the director who maybe will do a show that pays $500 in a couple months. I don't know, maybe they won't, and it's like the value of what I'll get from the show beyond the money, but also I have to pay my bills. I think that was the hardest thing for me to navigate in those first 3-4 years, and finding, when is it okay to say, I'm actually worth more than $200 now. And like, I would rather turn this show down if you can't pay me 500 or 1,000 or 1,500. And even at this point in my career, I struggle with like, when do I push back and say, no, I'm worth more than that? But I think that was the hardest part for me getting started, was like negotiating what I'm worth, what my time is worth, and what the show can give to me beyond the money. So.
Love it. All right, so we've gotten a great sort of grasp on like how we become a sound designer. So now we're a sound designer. Let's talk a little bit about the creative process. Tui, I'm going to throw this one to you. What is the first question you ask a director or your fellow collaborators when you start a design process?
I love this question because I'm constantly developing my list of questions to ask people that I work with. I'm actually going to answer it this way. The question that I ask a director that I'm working with for the first time before we even get into the room with the other designers is I usually ask, what's another production that they've done where they felt like the sound designer like failed the show, or that there was a moment in the show that the sound wasn't what it could have been, and can they tell me why they felt that happened? And that's helped me a lot with learning what expectations this director usually has of their sound designer. For example, a musical that I'm doing later this year, I got a chance to talk to the director and the composers, and I was able to ask that question. And the composers, because they both come from a background of being performers in Broadway musicals, and this is the first musical they've written, they said to me that in many of the shows that they've performed in, they feel like sound designers struggle with knowing how to create like foldback on stage, and that performers are always panicking about, can they hear themselves and can they hear the person next to them? And of course, like that's something I've been taught from sound people who have taught me about sound, but to actually hear a composer and a performer tell me that 101, like it hit me differently. So I really like trying to learn about what their expectations in their work process is.
Super smart.
I tend to, and this is more true now than it was back then, in the early days, because I would just say yes to any show that I was offered because I say yes to everything. But now I can't say yes to everything, and I don't want to say yes to everything. So I will, I want to have a meeting with the director that isn't even about the play before I decide if I want to take the job, because I want to know whether or not we get along. If I go into an interview that interview isn't just the director interviewing me, it's me also interviewing the director. And if it lasts an hour and we spent half of that time talking about things that aren't theater, just like kind of shooting the shit, that's a really good sign, right? And that's somebody that I want to be in a room with. That's somebody whose sense of humor I can sort of connect with, right? That's big for me. It's about like who I'm going to be in the room for 16 to 18 hours a day with these people, this director and my associate. Like, is this a person I really want to spend 18 hours a day with? Because I'm going to see them more than any other humans for X number of weeks. But then once we get into talking about the show, it depends on the show, right? I read it and then I want to know, what's the scenery going to look like? What's your vision for the show? Can I make the scenery make sounds? How do we want to achieve this sound effect? Is there going to be a puppet for that animal? Is there going to be somebody voicing it? Or do I need to make sound effects for that? And if so, like, where are they coming from? Is this it? And then it just becomes a creative conversation, but specifically about the show, that may or may not be informed by, sometimes writers put specific music in their shows, right? And so we have to sort of unravel that. Can we actually get Paul Simon's music rights? Probably not. So let's think of something else. Or this is really important to the play. So it really depends on the show and gets very specific. I don't know if that's true for you all.
Yeah, it definitely depends on the show for me, but I have a director who I've worked with a lot over the past decade, and he famously always says, well, the movie in my head, ... And the other designers that, I've worked with a lot too with this director, sort of are like, no, not the movie in his head comment, because it sort of feels like we're being expected to rise to some unattainable, place or something like that. And also we're not making movies, we're making theater. But I actually love the statement, the movie in my head, because I do want to know what in your ultimate dream world, like what is everything that you want? And in the movie in your head, you're already hearing something, right? Like there's already some kind of a feeling, this is really spooky overall, or super sappy and romantic, or, I just hear harpsichord all day long, whatever it is. I like to hear that movie in my head statement from a director. After that, I put together a YouTube playlist of just, music that supports the movie in that person's head. Nothing that is like, usually it's all like, licensed stuff, like stuff I'm not going to use in a show. I'm not even considering, but I'm just like, what is this, like the soundtrack that would match the movie in your head? So if we can,
is this the right radio station? Yeah.
Exactly. Yeah. If we could sort of like develop a musical language to begin with, I think that really helps me jump off in the right direction with a director.
I love it. Let's dig deeper into that. Cricket, why don't you start us out on this one? What software do you use for creating the sound design? I'm sure you will all have different answers and I want to hear them all.
I mean, Pro Tools and QLab are my go-to. Pro Tools to build it, QLab to play it back, although a lot of the building also happens in QLab. But that's kind of my primary, what I use.
Pro Tools, Ableton, QLab. Probably Ableton before Pro Tools. It depends on the project, right? Pro Tools is like, for me, really, really good at some things, but not, you can't have my water. Pro Tools is really, really good at some things, but Ableton has some flexibilities that allow you to manipulate audio in a way that Pro Tools can't. Do you see this? Do you see what's happening? Stop.
Yeah.
Stop. And so sometimes I just think, oh, well, that would be easier to do in Ableton because it lets me stretch things and manipulate it in weird ways, which you can do in Pro Tools. I'm just faster in Ableton, right? It's just, what are you comfortable in? I mean, you can do this work in any DAW. And usually the best one to use is the one you know well.
Pro Tools and QLab for sure, but I like to compose in Logic. So I use Logic for composition and anything that's really MIDI heavy, but then I end up sending it to Pro Tools and finishing it there. So I don't think that there's anything that I just use exclusively ever on one show.
How about you, Twee?
Yeah, I second all of that. And aside from like design creation things, I use a lot of like Google Sheets for my cue sheets, AutoCAD and Vectorworks, although I don't draft as much as I was convinced I would need to draft for my own shows. What else? R1, sometimes if I need the visual of how my Yamaha console would be laid out. Yeah, those are the main ones, but a lot of Google Sheets, honestly.
That reminds Twee's Google Sheets statement reminded me, Cricket, I know that you use this like the stage management. What is the stage management book collaboration thing that you were?
Oh, Cue List.
Yeah, I think that's right.
List. Yeah. You can put your script, it's basically an online platform, and then all the designers can put all their cues on, because the script is online, they all put their cues in the same book. So then when the lighting designer decides to move his cue 3 words earlier, you can see it and just move your sound cue. And then since the stage manager is also in the doc, they'll be like, oh, look, everybody moved up 3 words and just call it there. It was developed by a lighting designer out here in California, and it's kind of fabulous.
I think that thing sounds super smart. And ever since you first started talking about it, I've been trying to get people to get on board with me and using it. But I don't know. I think I'm really veering the conversation right now, but we could come back. I don't know about you all, but like how everything changes so quickly in this industry and is updated and new stuff all the time. Maybe I'm biased, but I just feel like sound people are like maybe a little more adventurous in trying new things. And so like when QLab first came out with lighting support, I was like, yay! Every lighting designer, I'd be like, look, can you design your show in QLab so that we can work on it together? And wouldn't that be so fun? And they're like, it's too scary. I don't want to do that. Like I only program on my console, and I'm like, okay, what about QList? Can we do QList together? I'm always wanting people to like collaborate with me on these new projects. And it's kind of difficult to get everyone else to take the risk with you.
If we're talking about drafting softwares, I do all of my speaker plots in Vectorworks. I also do all of my rack elevations in Vectorworks and all of my schematics, signal flow diagrams in Vectorworks. It's just, there's a lot of things that annoy me about Vectorworks, but it is.
Starting with the price point.
We could talk about a lot of things, but it can do all those things, right? So it does. You cannot have my water.
I prefer to just hire someone else to draft in Vectorworks with me, because Vectorworks and I don't get along. And the price point on Vectorworks, it's actually cheaper for me to hire a grad student to do the drafting than it is for me to buy Vectorworks and maintain a license. So I just don't draft all that much. So I'd really rather just pay someone else to do it. I just hate it.
You gotta know about yourself.
Although if you are trying to learn Vectorworks on your own and can't afford $1 million for a drafting license, there is an educational license that you can download that I believe is free. Vectorworks is the in the chat was a question about it. Yeah.
They also do monthly subscriptions now. So if you only needed it for a project for a month or two, it's like, I think $150 a month or something. And you can then turn it off when you're not using it. I just happened to get grandfathered into the Service Select program like a decade ago. And so now I pay $500 a year. I have no idea how I got that. It was just so long ago that, and they raise it every year a little bit, but it's like, it's so inexpensive considering the price point that it doesn't make sense for me to give it up.
Definitely hold on to that. Let's see. What would you say the ratio of time spent is working on your own, developing sounds, versus working with the production team in the theater? Elisabeth, why don't you kick us off?
I think the ratio is 50-50. I do not like to work in a vacuum. I am an over communicator, and I just am constantly, maybe to the point of paranoid about making sure that I'm still on the same page with everybody else, or I haven't missed something, or I haven't taken us into some weird dark corner or something. And so, yeah, I mean, the other thing about my solo work is that it's sort of hard for me, especially musically, to just sit down and start working. I kind of have to like be inspired and all this other like artsy stuff. Like I can't just sit down and write a song. Like I have to be like feeling something, or like hunched over a candle in the middle of the night or something. And so I think I get kind of some of that inspiration by continuing to stay connected with my peers and like my design team. And, they'll say, oh, I'm doing this like dark and moody, lighting thing during this moment, which will spawn me to be like, oh, yay, that gives me this great idea, and then I'll run home and work on it. 50-50 for me.
All right. Let's see. Cricket, why don't you take this one? Advice on building interesting soundscapes without taking away from the dialogue / actors' performances on stage.
I mean, that's always our job, is to build something to support the world without distracting from the reason we're there, which is the storytelling. So it's finding ways to have the sound tell the story without distracting from the cast who's also telling the story. Like we tell it together as opposed to separate. For me, I like to have the sound image from the stage as much as possible. I think I like the dynamics of when the sound is focused on the cast and the stage, and when it envelops the audience, like playing with when it's in surrounds, when it's upstage, how do we bring them into the story? When are we separating them from the story? I'm always playing with stuff like that. But I think that's what I love about tech and previews, is it's like, just playing, make this a little louder, make it a little louder, make it a little louder. Nope, too distracting, bring it back down. Oh, now I'm listening to the music and I'm not listening to the characters. Okay, great. Backtrack. But I think that's what tech and previews is all about, is kind of playing with that dynamic, because the sound should be a part of the characters. It should be a part of the action, not something that's laid on top of them. So finding ways to integrate. And I think part of the reason I like having the sound kind of come from upstage is because it means that the cast hears it too, like that they're a part of it. It's not coming from the proscenium and separate from them. So it makes it easier for them to kind of interact and make it part of their bodies and make it part of their storytelling too. So
I love that.
Go ahead, Twee. Please chime in.
And one thing that I've started doing, especially now that like a lot of my shows are becoming more in person instead of just virtual, is I like scheduling a listening session with my director at least once a few weeks before tech. And that I feel like helps me a lot to let them hear certain like soundscapes or music, because by that time, the director has been working on the show long enough that they have a better idea of what the show was going to be like, since I haven't seen it rehearsed at all. And for example, I just had a listening session with the director a few nights ago, and she was able to tell me, I feel like half of these cues are going to be way too much and like really retract from what the actors are doing on stage. And I feel like had I not had spent that time with her, we would have gotten into tech, and I would have been told for the first time, you need to rethink half of the show, and then I would have been screwed. So I really feel like making that time, and that also goes back to the previous question of like how much time is spent like in tech and previews versus like one-on-one. I do feel like it is that 50-50 because you're still collaborating prior to even getting into tech the first day. So
absolutely. I think that's something that we should be putting more of an emphasis on. I know that there's a group, at least in the Production Managers Forum, who's pushing for like, we do not need to do so much of tech in tech. We could do so much of tech before tech, and it would be better for everyone's mental health and for the budget.
I love a good paper tech. Paper tech. I love paper tech.
Love a paper tech. All right, Jess, I'm gonna have you jump on the corollary to that question. How can performers better work with sound engineers? What is most helpful, least helpful?
Most helpful would be not asking for their vocals in the monitors, and least helpful would be
asking for vocals in the
sorry, I'm being funny. I'm not. I'm being real, actually. But I think here's what's really not helpful: the stopping like dead in your tracks in rehearsal as an actor on stage and saying, "I can't hear anything," out to the whole room, because all it does is make me feel bad, right? And make me feel like you're just mad at me. And then it makes everyone else in the room think that you're mad at sound, and it just is not good. Like, I am super there to help you. I want to help you. I will do everything I can to help you. But if you're holding off telling me what your issue is so long that you're now just mad about it, that doesn't help anybody, especially you, right? Like, I didn't even know that you were having a problem. I didn't even get a chance to address it with you in a calm way and a constructive way. We are now already at upset and frustrated. And that doesn't need to be the case. Like, come talk to me. And I spend a lot of time on stage with actors, you know, and I do have a show that has vocals in the monitors. It's a little show called Hadestown, and small show. And it took a long time to convince us that we needed to do it. And part of the reason that we were able to was that the director had always wanted everyone on boom mics. And, you know, we had enough gain before feedback to make it happen. And also that Anais Mitchell, who wrote the show, is a musician. She's rock and roll, you know, and she's used to having wedges, and she was like, I just don't understand why there can't be vocals on the stage. And, you know, there was a lot of discussion, and we said, okay, we'll try it and we'll see how it goes, but it may not go well. And, you know, it actually went fine. So we kept it. Yeah, but don't like waiting to communicate that you're having a problem is never a good idea.
And also, never communicating that you're having a problem is not a good idea. Don't be sneaky, performers. If you decide to take your microphone off because you don't like how it looks under your costume, the sound designer and engineer will know. And this is a thing that happened to me, a true story of the day I almost lost my entire mind. I was doing a show that featured this big, elaborate death at the end of Act 1, and we did not hear the person who died, their final words. We did not hear the crying girlfriend, because both of them, per the costume designer's recommendation, decided to take their microphones off so that their silhouette was just as beautiful as possible. in this final moment. And I'm like, but it's a musical. So I'm just feeling like if we don't hear what's happening, we're not going to know. And I just, it's one thing for another designer to sort of, kind of do that kind of nasty thing to another designer, but for the actor or performer to do it and not even mention to, the sound team that they're planning on doing that was really crazy to me. So if someone gives you a strange recommendation that you don't think is going to fly, maybe get a second opinion.
Or just don't. If a costume designer gives you a recommendation about sound, don't take it. Talk to the sound person. In the same way that as a sound person, if I have an issue with the costume, I'm going to go to the costume designer, not just go to the performer and say, take your costume off.
Yeah, I mean, I hate your hat, but I know that you're supposed to wear it. So
yeah. I mean, communication across the board. It's not just about like monitors and costumes, but the same with like the sound effects or the music or the underscoring. Like, I would like to hear that more so that I can build it into my monologue. Or it's really distracting because it's right behind my head. Could the speaker move? Like, that's all stuff we can fix, but only if you talk to us and tell us what's going on.
And I have something sort of along those lines of like, this is a true story where I was in a production meeting after tech rehearsal one day, and the stage manager turned to me and said, so the backstage monitors still aren't working. And I said, well, when did they stop working? Because this is the first I'm hearing about it. What do you mean still aren't working? Why didn't no one tell me about this? Because you're coming at me with an attitude as if I were supposed to have fixed it, but I didn't even know it was an issue.
I would rather you tell me, I would rather have 4 different people tell me that the backstage monitors aren't working than nobody tell me and assume I know.
Well, and then, and then I get put on the spot and I kind of look like an idiot in the middle of a production meeting in front of my director and all the other designers. It's not good.
This doesn't happen to other departments, other than me like coming to every single production meeting and be like, it'd be great if by tomorrow I had a cue light. It'd be great if by tomorrow I had a cue light. It'd be great if by tomorrow I had a cue light. Let's see. We sort of dug into this a little. We had 2 questions from people with recording backgrounds asking about like the biggest difference between recording versus running sound for theater, which I guess is more about mixing, and then someone who wants advice on how to take a recording studio background and start designing for local theaters.
I mean, feedback. Like, you have big speakers, so the way you tackle EQ is different. Jess, you can probably talk about them. I have very little recording.
Yeah, it's different because you have a big giant sound system in the room with you, and there's no separation between, there isn't like that, quiet booth versus control booth with the wall in between. And so, that doesn't exist in theater. I would say the first thing that you should learn is how to tune a sound system using SMART, Rational Acoustics. That's the name of the company that makes SMART, SMAART, which is a FFT transfer function software that allows you to run pink noise through your speakers and tune them to make their response flat in the room that you're in. I highly suggest that. That is going to give you the best gain before feedback to start, right? And so, and just to say this, I tune my sound systems with either SIM, which is made by Meyer, or SMART, and then I will still then creatively EQ on top of that, right? Like I still am like, oh, it kind of sounds gross in the muddy grossness. I get rid of it. Or why is there all this 7K? Why does 7K exist? Can I get rid of it everywhere all the time? And then you find what's really funny is that there will then be frequencies that you just hate and want to cut from everything. And I highly suggest you don't do that just because you hate them, because they're important. But that's going to give you the best starting point, and also looking at how to use software like Myers Map 3D, D&B's Array Calc, L Acoustics. Every speaker manufacturer has their own prediction software. I would highly recommend learning how to use that because you can make better speaker choices, like, better gain before feedback because you have speakers that are much more directional. Line arrays that don't produce sound behind them, or et cetera, and so on. And you'll be able to look at what's going to end up back on the stage in these prediction softwares. So I hope I answered the question.
This question exactly mirrors my story because I come from a studio background and went into theater. And my advice on that front would be just to apply what you already do in the studio, in the theater. It's just the difference between watching a movie on your 13-inch laptop or going to the movie theater to watch a movie. Like if in the studio, you have to walk away every so often and come back and, give your ears a break, come back and make sure you're hearing what it is you want to be hearing. Do that in the theater too. Try different wacky plugins, like try the wrong thing to see exactly what it is you're trying to get rid of. Whenever I'm EQing stuff, I boost things inappropriately to make sure that that's the thing that I'm hearing that I hate, and then get rid of it. And that's a trick that I learned for the studio that I use in the theater all the time. And if there's, specific plugins and things like that, iZotope, I have a bunch of iZotope packages that I love, and you can absolutely load those onto your, into your front of house setup and use them in the theater live too, if you want to. So it's sort of just a transition of little to big. But you can use a lot of your same practices and skills.
And to add on to that, frankly, I don't have a recording studio background. I have a live music venue background. But I do a lot of reading magazines that talk about recording studio technique, and I bring those into my work in the theater. Like the way that you're processing the microphone and mixing the elements together doesn't change because you're in theater, right? The thing that changes is that now you have this big giant PA, and you have to choose speakers cautiously and creatively, and you need to tune the sound system so that you get the best possible results, right? And you're also using lavalier microphones instead of, a handheld mic, depending on the show. But so that sort of changes things as well and makes it just a little bit of a different beast. But the mixing part of it is not different. It's the same.
You're just doing it for a live audience instead of to get it perfect one time. Let's shift gears a little. Let's talk about, we've sort of touched on, the importance of mentorship and getting our starts. I'm going to two-part these two questions from Caitlin and Ioana. What advice do you have for young sound designers to start expanding to other regions? What advice would you give to your past self when you were starting out in the field? Twee, I'd love for you to take the first one because I know you were doing quite a bit of regional theater work pre-pandemic.
Yeah, can you repeat the first question?
Sure. What advice do you have for young sound designers who want to start expanding to other regions?
Expanding to other regions. Oh, that's interesting. Well, let me just tell what I did and why I think I have gotten the jobs I've gotten the past year. Like right before COVID, I literally sent my resume out to every theater I wanted to work for, which is the exact opposite of what like every older designer told me to do, because they told me that's not really a thing and that's very weird and you'll never get a job that way. But I literally made a list of like 80 theater companies, and like for a while, like nobody contacted me. But as soon as like COVID happened and everyone started doing virtual theater, like every theater I emailed called me about doing their virtual productions. And now that many of them are doing in-person shows, many of them are calling me like, hey, like we got your resume over a year ago and we'd love to have you. So I think my simple advice is like just emailing people. And I also say that because I have friends who do other things that are not sound, like directors and writers and things like that. And the thing I hate hearing most from my peers is that they're afraid to apply for something because they don't feel like they're qualified for it. And like that bothers me so much, because it's like you are cheating yourself out of someone else telling you no. Even if like you're terrified and you know you only have 2 credits on your resume and one of them wasn't even paid, just go ahead and like apply anyways. So my advice is just to apply for everything that you can.
The worst thing anyone can say to you is no. Like, so if that's the worst that could happen, is that really that bad? Just apply for the thing. I also think that the culture around hiring designers is changing, and where, basically people told Twee, like, don't send your resumes to places because they only hire people that they know, or people that from word of mouth, etc. I think that that's changing now because there is this shift, this seismic shift in the industry, to create more opportunity, more diverse opportunities, and it's about equity, etc. And so I think that a lot of theaters are in fact looking for new people, because going back to the same people over and over again is sort of a big no-no now.
It's called gatekeeping.
Yeah,
it's literally gatekeeping.
Exactly. So I think that in this day and age, sending your resume is a good thing to do, right? Having a website, get a website, put your stuff up on a website, put your resume on a website. Try to get an agent or a manager. I know that's hard. It took me 10, 12 years to find one. And my agent actually doesn't help me find work. So, but getting a manager that does help you find work, that puts you, or an agent that will help you find work, that can connect you with directors. Go to the, I don't believe you have to be a union member, but there are sometimes events that are like, director designer networking
Speed
events. Speed dating. I mean, you're not supposed to say speed dating anymore. I don't really know why that is.
Round robin.
Round robin. Yeah, round robins. So there are events like that. Look for those. Email directors that you want to work with, whose work you like, and see if they would have a cup of coffee with you. I get people students emailing me all the time. Hey, can we talk on Zoom? Can we do a phone call? I'm writing this thesis. I'm doing this thing. Can we meet? And I make time for them. So I'm certain that there are directors and producers and all that will respond. And if they don't have time right now, we'll put you on their list to get to when they do have time.
I want to sort of grab a question that's differently in my order, but feels like a good segue now, since we're talking about young sound designers. How about people who specifically feel like their foot in the door was stunted or delayed by the pandemic? So maybe they've got a lot of academic experience, but not a lot of professional experience. Doesn't matter. Do the same thing.
Same thing. Yeah. Build a portfolio, get a website, keep your resume up to date, email it.
Yeah.
Sit
Be
down with
Googleable.
directors.
That's a big one for me. Be in control of what shows up when I Google you.
Yeah. And it's also a sort of exciting time because whoever is in the industry right now, as of 2020, they're the ones that have just learned all these new skills, for the Zoom plays and the radio plays and, all the video stuff, because we have to do all the video stuff as sound designers. It's nice. It's nice to be able to learn a bunch of new stuff and apply that to your fresh resume when you're emerging, because I anticipate that even though we're going to go back to the stage, which I'm very happy for, and that's what I'm in it for, that we're going to be incorporating all this new stuff that we just learned forever in a new way. So if you have been studying up on that during the pandemic, and you've really gotten yourself in the know on the Zoom plays or live streaming, et cetera, you're going to be marketable and valuable to a company that's going to try to incorporate that into their new programming.
Or to a designer, which is sort of again, a similar question. What skills or traits do you look for when hiring an assistant sound or associate sound designer? You know, we've talked a little bit about skills, but also what you want in that human.
Can you repeat that? I'm sorry.
What skills or traits do you look for when hiring an assistant or associate sound designer?
I mean, someone I want to be in the room with for 16 hours, like Jess was saying about directors, it's the same thing with assistants and associates. Someone that I want to spend 16 hours with, someone who will, who can anticipate, you know, the needs of the production and can be, you know, another set of ears in the room for me, someone who knows how to read the room, like when is a good time, like where am I in my process, when is a good time to interrupt me and tell me something, and what's urgent and what's something they can write down or take care of themselves, or, you know, or just save till I've got the headspace for it. You know, if I'm swamped in having an intense conversation with the other designers, now is not the time to come over and be like, hey, can I clean up the software, whatever, you know, like being able to read the room. That's important to me.
That's so like corollary to how I feel as an A1 looking for A2s too, and that I want someone who's going to compliment me. I know that I am a music first A1, so I'm looking for like a systems first A2, you know, because we're gonna, you know, they're gonna know why there's a buzz in the comm, and I'm gonna know why the dynamics in the show aren't landing, and that's gonna make us a better team. Especially like if for example, you hire someone who works with an associate who does a lot of your systems stuff, or does a lot of your organizing stuff, or does a lot of your communication stuff, because everybody delegates their assistants differently.
I think there's a difference between assistants and associates, which I'll come back to. But I think it is, you know, it's sort of the same thing that I said about interns, right? It's like, do you ask good questions? Can you see the next thing that's coming? Do you come to me and ask me what's next? Or do you expect me to come to you and tell you what's next? Are you curious? And I think there was another panel I was on a couple months ago where a scenic designer friend of mine said that what she looks for in associates and assistants are good designers. She wants a good designer to be her associate because that will complement her. They will have ideas. I want people that have ideas. I want to hear the ideas. I want, you know, I want to trust their ears. I want to trust that. I want to trust them programming the console. I want to trust them to be able to represent me in the room when I'm not there, which applies more to an associate. So I'll get to that, right? An assistant to me, an associate is somebody who can speak for me in the room when I can't be there, and that I can leave alone with my director and I will still have my job tomorrow. Right. So
yeah, I mean, that's important.
And
that's distinct to the theater industry, that I think it's important for people to know that like associates can make decisions on the designer's behalf and assistants cannot. So like if you're an assistant and the director's like, we need that cue lowered, your job as the assistant is to say, we need to run that by the designer. So like, you know, good advice, how to not mess it up when you're an assistant. That's a way to start.
Yeah. Yeah. So that's the thing. Yeah.
Cool. We have just a little bit of time left, so I'll pull out some sort of fun ones to end on. Anybody who wants can take this. What was the most challenging moment you've had to overcome while designing a show? What's your war story? Your eyes all went.
I think pulling myself emotionally back together, I often have on many shows felt like it was just so hard, and I went home and just cried. I just cried because first of all, you're exhausted. You've been in the theater 16 hours a day. It usually happens around previews, like toward the end of tech or early previews, because your body is physically exhausted, which means that like your emotional rope is frayed, right? And sometimes it's just hard. It's just hard. And maybe I don't know the answer to something, or I can't find the solution, and I just cry. and then I have to pull myself together, and then I have to let it go. And then I find the answer. Right. But I have to go through that process of like that ultimate frustration. And emotional catharsis, and then I'm okay.
I had a show that the director started the conversation with, I don't know anything about sound. I don't know how to talk about sound. I don't like talking about sound. I don't know anything about sound. And I was like, you don't ever have to know anything about sound. Talk to me about story. Talk to me about emotion. Talk to me about feeling. Talk to me about those things. I'll translate it to sound. You don't have to understand sound. But sound terrified her. And so anytime, and it was a big project with a lot of pressure, and anytime she felt insecure, I was the one she could attack because I was the one she was most insecure about. And so she and I didn't have a way to communicate. She was my best buddy until she got insecure, and then she would attack me in front of the room. And I wasn't the only one she was attacking, but the whole team would get attacked at various points. But the room, we had no communication, we had no trust, we had no no enjoyment of each other's company, because we never knew who was the next person to get attacked. We never knew when we were going to get attacked. And and so all the communication broke down. We didn't want to, nobody wanted to talk to the director, nobody wanted to get notes, nobody wanted to collaborate with each other, because we were scared that if we did something without the director, we'd get attacked the next day, and we didn't know who was going to get thrown under the bus. And so that was one of the things that was, it was an absolutely traumatizing show. And I came home from it and thought, I'm in the wrong career. I have to leave theater completely. This is horrible. And this show was only like 5 years ago, so it's not like I was new in the business, but I was suddenly questioning my ability to do anything, because it wasn't just me, but I could not establish any kind of relationship or sense of trust with the director. That we were never on the same team. We were on our own team, and we were never collaborators. And it's a feeling she brought into the room and that she made a part of the process. The designers never felt like a team. We never felt cohesive. We never felt like we were working together. And I admit, like, how do I overcome that? I don't know. The show opened, I went home, I cried for a week. And the next show I did was with a theater company that I have done every one of their productions for the past 15 years. I am a company member. They are some of my closest friends. And I shook all the way through tech because I was waiting for them to yell at me. And it took some time, like, to be like, no, I do know what I'm doing. And that was just a bad experience. So I can't say I have a good way of getting over it, except, like Jess said, sometimes you just have to come home and cry and calm down, and then you can recalibrate. So
I have definitely been in that situation, Cricket, and sometimes it's just, some relationships cannot be made no matter what, and you just have to find a way to gracefully get through it. And my biggest bugaboo on things that really derail me in the design process are when a director will not let a designer design. When the director is trying to design a show, that is just counterproductive to the process. And I have a friend who is a brilliant actor and a superb university professor, but has recently just started directing. So she's a pretty new and young director. And I designed a show for her a couple of years ago. And I started off with that YouTube playlist that I was talking about after the movie in the head thing. I put together a YouTube playlist of, and she had told me that the theme of the show musically was angsty, girl fronted, grungy, like punk rock music, which I was like, then you hired the right designer, because this is exactly up my alley. So I was like super stoked on getting that kind of stuff together. I put together a whole playlist, and I don't think it even got listened to. In fact, I know it doesn't, because on my YouTube channel, I can see if people hit my music or not. And so just in turn, she brought me back a playlist of music that she was thinking of which didn't at all, in my opinion, match the genre that she had described. And we did a lot of back and forth throughout rehearsal tech of me trying something one time and her being like, nope, that's not it. Let's do this instead, you know? And I'm like, well, it's a process. I have to hear how it goes. And then if you don't like it, you could tell me what about it you don't like, and then we can, you know, make an edit and then go on. But she really seemed to be like, if I hear it one time and I don't like it, I'm just going to replace it with something that I want. And it was difficult, especially because we were friends. And so I didn't really know how to broach that topic with her. I sort of just got through the whole show like that. And then afterwards, I just very bluntly brought it up and said, I love working with you, but I didn't love the way that this process went. And maybe the next time we work together, you know, here's when I think that it's an appropriate time to say, actually, I'm not buying that idea at all. Can we go in a different direction? You know, but you do need to let me try before you offer something else completely. And she was like, oh, I didn't even know I was doing that. I'm horrified, you know, that's what happened. And she completely acknowledged that she was a young director and, you know, that maybe she needed guidance too. So I think that again, just harkens back to all the communication talk we've been having. If you don't say what you need, it's never going to get fixed. So as scary or as awkward as it might be, if something's not going your way, you're going to have to speak up about it or just be good with dealing with it.
Okay, can I add quickly? Because I'm inspired by all of these.
Yes, please.
To share the worst thing that happened to me. And yes, the crying thing is real. The last show I did before COVID, in-person show, was at Kansas City Rep. Huge show that I was not ready for at that time of my life. And so during previews, I was sitting in the house and we came back for the second act of the show. And so the act 2 started and there was like no sound at all coming through the speakers. And this was a show that had lots of mics, lots of like live music on stage, and there was just no sound coming out. And like the whole audience sat through the whole act 2 with no sound. And part of me was like, I need to get up and like go help the mixer because I don't know what's going on. But for many reasons in that whole process, I was very insecure, and that show taught me that as a sound designer, you're not only a creative, you have to lead everything in your department as well. And I allowed myself to sit there and not fix anything because I was afraid. And when the show was over, of course, the director, everyone was so upset. And I had to stop everyone from being upset at the mixer and kind of like diverge the anger to me, because as the leader, I should have done something. Come to find out, it was something very simple. Somehow the mixer like muted the board in some way that she couldn't realize she muted the board. But had someone like myself gotten up and went to the back of the house and talked to her, it would have been fixed in the middle of the show. So leadership is something that definitely like you have to grow into as a sound designer that I learned the hard way. So yeah.
Thank you for sharing that. I think it's really important for us to understand. I mean, I know that as a mixer, I so much appreciate my designer, you know, coming to bat for me, being there to defend me, being there to say, you know, she's doing what I told her to, you know, I'm the head of this department. I think it helps us work together better. I just realized, I checked my schedule. We're actually scheduled to go until the end of the hour. So if you are all able to stay, if you're not, that's fine. I'll go into some bonus questions.
Sure. I have 2 things to add since we have time.
Please do.
One is just on Twee's note, you know, I am a designer who very much feels like it is my show, therefore everything is my fault. It's all my fault. If the A2 doesn't get a microphone on somebody the right way, or the mixer does a thing, all of it is my fault. And I take full responsibility for it. Because ultimately it's my job to coach the people on my team in how to care for the show and maintain the show. And it's ultimately my design, right? So I will add that. The other thing I wanted to add, which is like, I don't have a specific, I do have one specific story, but something that frustrates me is when directors don't give me notes. That makes a very bad experience for me, because I feel like I'm then living in some sort of abyss where I'm like, I have no, I mean, I guess it's okay because I'm not getting a note, but I don't know if it's okay. Is this sound cue working? Is it loud enough? Is it too quiet? I don't know. And it's really, that's really hard and makes for a bad experience for me, because I just feel like, you know, I want, to some extent, I want a little bit of validation. Like, hey, that sound cue sounds great. Going in the right direction. Awesome. This is great music choice. Like, I don't know, something, but you know, when you get to, and part of that is not that they're not paying attention to sound. I've learned over the years that it's that they are paying so much attention to everything else that they don't have the bandwidth to pay attention to sound. And I've realized that what will then happen is that soon enough, it will become my day where every note is about sound. But leading up to that, like I took a long time to learn that I will get the notes eventually. But yeah, sometimes there was a show I did at Berkeley Rep, and like the director never said anything to me about anything. And I had no bearing on where I was in the process. And I suppose everything was fine, because that was the one show where my day never came, actually. And it could not possibly be that I did that good of a job. Like, it just couldn't be. And I'm being serious. I'm not even being facetious about that. Like, it is not possible. So I don't know if he was just so like entrenched in everything else. It just never came around to being my time. But
I'm working on an audio drama right now where I've sent 6 different versions to the director and gotten nothing back. Like, just, oh yeah, that's great. Oh yeah, that's awesome. And it's like that, no, it's not. And I finally gave up and started sending it to the composer, because I was like, and he gives me great feedback, but I'm like, I can't work in a vacuum. I need to bounce ideas off of people. I need to like have the back and forth. And like, I found other people who will give me the feedback, who will give me the back and forth.
I feel like a lot of it has to do with people are still learning how to talk to us, which I like am sort of sick of letting them off the hook for. Like, we've been around long enough at this point. The joke I always tell is like, you suck is not a useful note. You suck and here's why is a useful note. You know, because then, but
everything is horrible. Yeah, everything is horrible. You know,
it's not I love this and here's why tells me I'm on the right course. I'd be like, oh, I know that they like where this part of the show's sitting. So now I have something I can emulate a little bit.
Yeah. The horrible show I was talking about, the director, like her most common note was everything is horrible. Like, that is not a note I can take. That is not a note I can do anything with. And like the 3rd time she gave it to me, I went up to the engineer. I was like, the next time we run this number, kill all the reverb. Take all reverb off of everything. No reverb anywhere. Mute it all. He's like, that's going to be horrible. I was like, yes, but now she'll have something to respond to other than everything is horrible.
See,
I totally did that on, we were doing Hadestown in London, as a matter of fact, and it was our out of town before Broadway. And we had done the show once before in Canada, and Aeneas came over to me and said, you know, I feel like the A1 is like riding the band too much. I really want the band to control their own dynamics. And I was like, it doesn't really work that way, but okay. And so I went up to my A1, and to this day, he thinks it's the most badass thing he's ever seen anybody do. And I was like, put the band fader at -10 and don't touch it for the entire run through. And he's like, what? But I can't do that. It's like, I'm telling you, put the band fader in one spot and don't move it for the entire run through. And guess what happened? We then got notes about where the band level needed to be. Well, the band was too quiet here. Now it's too loud. And then it was like, you told me you wanted the band to control their own dynamics, and this is what happens when I do that. Great. Now I have information. So now you can mix the show, and here's what you need to do. But We had that one, he was like, I cannot believe that you even dared to do that. I was like, what else was I supposed to do? I mean, I can sit here and go back and forth with her about why this isn't going to work, or I can just prove it. And frankly, then I don't even have to say anything. I don't have to argue with her at all.
See, this is exactly what I was talking about. If you highlight the wrong thing inappropriately to an inappropriate amount, then people know what to do to respond to it. I just wanted to highlight, to your point, Becca. Yeah, that's the number one problem, is that directors don't know how to talk to sound people. It's scary. You can't see it. You can't touch it. I have had director after director say to me way too late, after the closing of a show, well, I just didn't know that, I could respond to that, or like that you had control over that. I just didn't know. Sometimes they're like, I'm afraid to say something because what if actually what it is like really perfect, in the industry, and all of the people with the right ears would love it, but I don't like it. Am I going to like show some, weakness or something like that in knowledge? And so I just try really hard to sort of teach the language to the non-sound speaking friends as much as possible. And at PCPA, actually, it's an initiative that the sort of artistic office took on a couple of years ago, where they invite, they ask for designers, the resident designers of each department, to come into the artistic office for like a brown bag lunch. And we all just sit around the table, and the designer tells the artistic director, the managing director, the associate artistic director, et cetera, what their job is, and how they do it, and what the terms mean, and sort of just a step by step. And I think that that's really great that the producers sort of office is taking it upon themselves to learn how to speak the language, and how to collaborate with sound designers and with all designers, really.
Oh my God, I have two stories, and they're really quick. One is a horrible experience, and one is an actual like magical experience. The horrible experience was I accepted a show with a director that I knew full well I shouldn't have accepted, because she's a sociopath, and I can't hear you. What'd you say?
I wonder if it's the same sociopath I worked with.
There's a few sociopaths out there, so I'm not sure, but I knew from having been someone's associate on a show where she was the director that like I shouldn't take this show, and she hired me as a designer, and I was like, and you know what the thing was, she complimented me in our phone call, and I was like, oh, she gets it now, she's changed. And it turns out she didn't. So we get to the dress run. My A1 gets a chance to get through the show from top to bottom for the first time ever. Of course, there was like a couple of missed pickups. There was like some things that weren't quite right. There's a bunch of notes. We get to first preview. They made leaps and bounds of improvement. In the production meeting, the director, when we got to sound, turned to me and said, when is it going to get better? In front of the entire team of people, when is it going to get better? And I said, well, that was literally the second time this person has ever mixed the show. The second time. It's going to get better every day. And frankly, I already think that there were improvements today. I was mortified. And like, how dare you? That's not a useful note. That's a you suck with no reason why. Like, don't give me that note. Tell me in what moments the band was too loud, and in what moment. She also did this really horrible thing where she would, after the group meeting, she would then send her assistant to me to give me her notes. And she would give me notes separate from the music department. And I finally had to put a stop to that. And I was like, because he would give me a note, the assistant would give me a note. And I was like, well, what does that mean? I don't know what that means. And he's like, I don't know. I just wrote it down. Okay. And I'm like, this is the problem. Like, why is my director not willing to come over and have a conversation with me about these notes? I need to hear it from her. You giving me a list of notes doesn't help me if you don't know what they mean. And also we need to put a stop to sound getting notes separately from music. We were like struggling. The music department was struggling with this thing at the end that we couldn't hear because he was trying to do it with like brushes on the snare, which just wasn't reading and wasn't loud enough. And when we finally got notes together, I was able to say, oh, well, I can help you with that, music department, because I can make that thing louder. Like, I didn't even know that was a note. But here he is trying to make the poor drummer like smash into his snare drum. And like, I just didn't know. And I mean, I can make it infinitely louder. And ultimately that didn't work. And we made 2 wooden blocks with sandpaper on them for the, but because we got notes together, I was able to say, hey, why don't we like get 2 wooden blocks and rub them together? That'd be great. And we solved the problems. It was just an absolute nightmare of a situation. The second story, which is magical, is that I once worked with a director who basically would say to me, so you need like, what, 3 days before I can give you, like, I should just not worry about what it sounds like for like 3 days, right? And I was like, yes, like, give me a chance to like get in there and kind of, sculpt the base of this thing and make the show sound good from top to bottom. And then we can start thinking about, where we're going to put details in. And I was like, this woman is brilliant. Thank you. Whoever trained her and how to talk to people. She's like, yeah, do your thing. I'll come back to you in a couple days.
It's like no one ever complains that we have to run the quick change 3 times. They're like, oh, we get it. But when we like need to like EQ someone more than once, they're like, what? Blasphemy.
My favorite is when
that is the case.
My favorite is when it like we literally just sound checked the band this morning and it's the first time actors and band are together ever. And the music department is just like all over me about why things sound the way they do. And I'm like, they sound the way they do because this is actually the first time that we're turning it on with all the things together. It's really going to be okay. I promise.
All right. What is the best advice you received in the industry? You all made the thoughtful face again.
No, I have one, and it's the one I always say, which is that on that particularly challenging show with that director, I just couldn't figure out how to make this relationship happen, and then there was a moment, this is actually a third show that I knew I shouldn't have taken with her. I called one of my mentors and basically he said, there are just some people you can't form these relationships with, and that's okay. Like, you don't have to work with everybody. You don't have to say yes to every show. But also, he said, don't take it personally. And when you walk in the door in the morning, when you put your hand on the doorknob to go into the theater, ask how you can help. That is the best thing that you can do in this situation. How can I help tell this story? How can I help? Because you can't help her, right? But you can help everyone else. And that's what you need to do. And that was how I was able to get through the rest of that process.
The best piece of advice that I have gotten actually was related to starting a family. And I was talking to my husband, and I were at a wedding just a couple of months after our daughter was born. And we were sitting next to a director that I work with a lot. And we were talking about how we were a little bit worried about, like being able to still travel or like do the things that we like to do, in our adult lives. Like, are we going to be chained to a crib for the rest of our lives now, et cetera, and it was really funny too, because this director doesn't even have kids and he never will. And he's just a kidless person, which is great. But he has very close friends that have a few kids. And he said that those people said to him, we do a lot of traveling, we do all of this stuff all the time, and we're not going to let our family dynamic and our wants and needs change just because we have a kid now. We need to remain intrepid. And that's what this friend director said to me. You guys just need to remain intrepid. And I mean, literally, I say it all the time in all areas of my life. In my brain, when I start to feel like I'm sinking or slinking down or giving in to just, like, if I bring up an idea at the theater and others are like, that's too hard, or that's just too weird and out there, this is something that I really want, and I think that's going to make an impact and be a good choice. I'm sitting there telling myself, remain intrepid. You can do this. Like, just prove it. Just prove that this is a worthy thing to do. And, it is adventurous and you have to go out on a limb a little bit. But if you don't, then no one will ever know what you have to offer.
I love that so much. I feel like I need to jump in and like just tell you that like you and other people who are like doing this thing and also parenting are such an inspiration to me as someone who aspires to parenthood. You're like making me believe that it maybe can be done. And
it can be.
That's amazing.
Just remain intrepid.
Since COVID, is this a job one can do remotely?
I mean, it's a different job, but I've been doing it.
Right. Many parts of it can be. I mean, I think that I think in the future, there will probably never be in-person production meetings anymore, unless you're in the theater with the people and it's the end of the night. But I think all production meetings prior to being in the theater together will happen over Zoom. And I think that that's actually great, because the amount of time that it takes to travel between the things to make the meetings on time and be able to attend them is often something that prohibits me from being able to attend them as often as I'd like. So I think that's really going to be a good thing, right? And of course, like that, there is nothing that can replace being in the room with the director and the scenic designer and looking at the model. And maybe that will still happen in person, but overall, I think we will be better for having our production meetings over Zoom in the future. And the paperwork required before you go into a shop prep or, your cue lists, all of that has always sort of been remote, right? Because we do that on our own time.
I zoomed into a production meeting pre-pandemic from the shop. It was a much better use of my time than going to the theater.
You just can't stand, there is nothing to replace standing in a theater and listening to the speakers with your human ears that are attached to your head. So it's never going to be replaceable 100%, but I am hoping that we will be able to remember these things that sort of kept us efficient during this time.
All right. What is your biggest hope for changes in organizational practices and EDI for theater in the Aftertimes? I just really want to go first. No more 10 out of 12s. That's my soapbox. I never want to do a 10 out of 12, which is a rehearsal in which the actors are called for 5 hours, a 2-hour break, and 5 hours. But if that's how long the actors are there, think about how long everyone else is there. No more 10 out of 12s.com. It's a national movement.
Which I will say, because Lindsay and I sort of spearheaded that, and some of you know this, some of you don't, but there is a website, no more 10 out of 12s.com. Thank you, Becca. And we have a petition and we've collected testimonials. We've had over 700 people submit testimonials about why they think 10 out of 12s need to go away. And we have over 1,500 or 1,600 signatures on our petition so far. And I think the plan is we're sort of going to like gather that and send it to Equity and the other unions, et cetera. At some point, there is a plan in motion that is happening, but it's pretty impressive the response that we've gotten from people. I had no idea that, it was just like a feeling I was having and some of my close friends were having, and knowing that 1,500 or 1,600 signatures is not a small amount.
Twee and I recently had a email conversation sort of about this. And I was really wondering, Twee, if you could talk about your open letter that you wrote in regards to this. Because I just like scream it from the rooftops everywhere. Every time we're talking about it, I'm like, look at this letter.
That you mentioned that. The 1-year anniversary, that is like June 8th, I think. And people have been asking me if I'm going to write again, and I'm terrified to. Yeah, that letter, the inspiration for that letter came out because I saw this like Broadway actor make this like video that went viral about like how hard it is being a performer and things like that. Not saying that it's not, but I feel like we always hear those stories. Directors, actors, playwrights are always given a platform to talk about things like that. And designers and technicians usually are not. And that's really why I felt the need to take the space to say that. And of course, because all of the Black Lives Matters things that was happening and things like that. Um, and there are many things that I think have changed, not because of anything that I said in my letter, but because of what other people have done over the past year. And with that being said, one of the changes that one thing that I want to hopefully continue to see as theater goes back in person is that I really hope virtual theater and radio plays remain a thing. I never want to do another virtual show, but I think it has made theater accessible for so many different people who usually cannot afford theater, who don't want to go into a theater for many reasons. And it has made jobs accessible. Granted, during the pandemic, like scenic designers, costume designers really didn't have a space in the virtual theater world for a while, but I feel like it's made space for so many new sound designers, and I think it could be a platform to really give like emerging sound designers like their first chance at like designing for a theater. So I really think this virtual theater thing is a great way for like no longer gatekeeping if we want to make space for other people.
Getting producers out of the habits of hiring only the people they know. Like, and I will, when someone reaches out to me and says, oh, well, we want an all-female team and you're the only female sound designer we know, so want to come do the show, I'll write back and say, here's a list of 5 other female sound designers. If you interview them, you may interview me, but like, I'm not the only one out there. So take the moment and interview them. And it's funny because none of them have come back to me. Like they all pick someone else off the list. And it's like, yeah.
I also think
you don't know.
redundancy, right? There is, pre-COVID, I was often, it's me and my associate, right? And for the Delacorte this year, I asked for an assistant for a couple of weeks because I wanted redundancy on site, not just in the, for a couple of reasons. One, if I end up with COVID, I have to quarantine for 10 days. And then who's going to just like deal with the system design? That's going to fall onto my associate, who is then going to be all alone and have no support. If my associate should get COVID, then that leaves me and my assistant. So now we still have a 2-person team. And I think that a lot of the other thing that I'm saying is coming out of this pandemic, it is going to be much less acceptable to have a cold or a flu and be at work, because people are not going to be okay with that, right? And I think that that's going to be the way it is for a while. And, what happens if it's not COVID and I show up to work and my temperature's a little too high and they don't let me in the building?
I think you get paid sick leave. I think that's what needs to happen.
I mean, well, as a designer, I'm getting paid a fee, so I don't know how that would work, but yes, I just think like we need to start thinking about, maybe more of the London model where there is an A1, an A2, and an A3 on every show, so that there is built-in redundancy. And all 3 of them know how to mix the show, and all 3 of them know the A2 track. And I know that like for everybody feels like, oh, well, that's more money and we don't, theaters don't have money right now. And I understand that, but what happens when someone is sick and they can't be at work? And then that means, and it's the A1, and then there's only a 1-person sound department to do the show. And what do you do then? And what happens when you lose a performance because of something like that?
Twee and I were discussing this just the other day, that like I refuse to believe that the A1 specifically is allowed to be the single point of failure in any production ever again. Like I refuse to do an off-Broadway without an A2, and I refuse to do an off-Broadway where I do not train that A2 on the mix like immediately. And I think, and I'm hoping that producers are gonna buy it, and they're gonna be like, you know what's way less expensive? Like losing a performance or having that performance be so low quality because someone didn't have enough training time that it would have been better to not do it. Let's see.
I think related to EDI, the EDI question, I am really hoping for longevity in EDI training and practices long after the pandemic is over. I think that whatever the impetus was for theaters jumping on board and getting EDI training in their houses, supporting Black Lives Matter, et cetera, the things that we've been looking at over the past year, I think that some companies probably did it to show that they were doing it. I think that some of it is probably performative, but I think that some of it began that way and is really starting to sink in, and some change is really starting to happen. So no matter how it began, I'm really hoping that when we're not all under the microscope still, and everyone's not, checking to see if companies are doing the things, that they're just doing it because that's the way that it is now. And that's just what we naturally know. And that's just what is the right thing, to create an equitable space for everybody involved.
Amen to that. Let's see. Is there an unmet market /need/niche that would be good to market to and provide? I guess that's in the context of like maybe what Twee was saying about like some people should definitely do radio plays. What are your thoughts on this panel?
I can kind of answer that because one of my favorite genres to design, I love children's theater so much, from the creative aspect, but also like there's a different type of collaboration that has to happen for children's theater. So I guess my advice on that is like, if you're the type of person that's still like trying to figure out your aesthetic as a designer, like try to explore different genres of storytelling and like stick to that if you can. Granted, I don't get a lot of kid shows, but the ones that I do get, I honestly think it's like my best work, and I would like to do more of it. So really like finding a genre that you like.
Super smart. You could be good at a lot of things and still have like a favorite thing. I guess for our last one, I'll sort of circle back. I asked this earlier, but I think I then sort of cut it off because I conflated with the other ones. So earlier it was, what advice would you give the you that was starting out in the field? So I guess that's sort of like, what's something you wish you'd known?
Your time is worth more than you think it is. Start asking for higher rates sooner. I waited too long. I took fees way below what I should have for too long because I was scared to ask for more. I didn't want them to tell me no. I wanted to be the one that, and the job wasn't worth it. I was worth more than that.
I was too afraid to reach out to other designers and introduce myself and make coffee dates. And I was just, I didn't promote myself. I got lucky because, I had designers I worked with that hired me for everything that they did. And, I just would sort of wait for the work to come to me. But I probably could have moved through my career faster had I sent my resume to designers and started forging those relationships sooner, right?
I think I would tell former me to just say yes if you want it. I think in the beginning, there were a lot of opportunities that I missed out on that I was offered because I didn't think that I was qualified when probably I was. But you know, you don't have to have written a thesis on a topic to be qualified to do the thing. You know, if you know something about it, I mean, you can just keep learning the thing, and you can get in it, and that will be part of your training by doing the thing. But I think that I really thought that I had to be a master of everything that somebody offered me to maybe I thought it was like unethical for me to say yes if I hadn't had like extensive experience in exactly the kind of thing I was being asked to do.
And I'll add quickly, something that I'm just learning and growing into is being social with other designers that are not sound designers. It has completely opened up my world in so many ways of like, I'm able to be a little more comfortable in meetings now. If I've talked to the costume designer a couple times, that's not about work. Other designers have also advocated for me a lot in so many ways, whether it's like money or the way I've been treated at work. And also I've learned that especially early in your career like me, other designers can help you get jobs on shows that they're doing if the show hasn't staffed the sound person yet. And that has happened to me a lot, which I've been very grateful for. So just being social with non-sound designers can really like open up your life.
All networking is good networking. What a great note to end on. It's 4 o'clock. I want to thank our panelists so much for joining us. Elisabeth Weidner, Twee McCallum, Jess Paz, and Cricket Myers. For those of you, if we weren't able to get to your questions, I know there was a couple that were about mixing, which I'm going to email you people since that's sort of my lane, but also you can refer back to the Ask the Experts panel that we had about musical theater mixing that Elisabeth moderated. That's on the YouTube channel. Someone asked a question about sanitizing microphones in COVID, and this other organization that we're all in called the TSDCA, Theatrical Sound Designers and Composers Association, has some videos up on their website discussing this topic specifically. And that is a website that I'll put in the chat, but feel free to reach out to me, to any of us at SoundGirls, and we hope you all learned something today. Thanks for coming.
Thank you.
Today at Hurley's.